you today to this New Jersey MEP Crisis Coach webinar session. We're going to focus today on, are you really prepared for an active shooter? And our panel was having a lively discussion right at the top of the hour, so we started a few seconds late. We'd like you to join us and be our friend on social media. You can, on Twitter, it's at Firestorm Book, it's Firestorm Solutions. There is a hashtag for today's session, and it's hashtag Crisis Coach. Firestorm transforms crisis into value. We empower you to manage crisis and risk. Firestorm expertise is crisis management, critical decision support, crisis communications, crisis public relations, and consequence management. Firestorm is America's crisis coach, and we're focused on risk and crisis, as you can tell. Predict, plan, perform methodology, and I think you're going to hear how that works today in the area around active shooter. Today's presentation is not complete without the accompanying oral comments and discussions, and any product provided by us should be read in conjunction with your national, regional, and local authorities, as well as your corporation or organization's personal counsel. Moreover, the information and comments in this webinar should not be interpreted as legal advice or legal opinion. We're working with the New Jersey MEP, and Joe could be with us today, and Blair is the Firestorm principal that's teaming with them directly. So Blair, why don't you tell us a little bit about New Jersey MEP?
Sure, Jim. Thank you. First, I want to thank New Jersey MEP for their efforts and their support of Firestorm and this webinar series over the last few years. For those of you who may not know, New Jersey MEP is a manufacturer-focused organization that is designed to help and work with manufacturers in New Jersey. They're part of NIST, the National Institute for Standards and Technology, and their focus is really around finding ways to help improve and increase manufacturing excellence, operational excellence, innovation and growth programs. And they've taken a very serious approach to continuity and sustainability, and therefore their support of us and this webinar series for their clients. Anyone who has any questions, I'm not sure if we'll have time at the end for questions, but if there's any questions, you can get back to Joe or myself, and we'll address those. Jim?
Well, thanks a bunch, Blair. Always good to hear. And to talk, we're very lucky today to have Marc Connolly joining us. He's the Executive Vice President of Secure Education Consultants. Marc is a retired Secret Service agent and special agent in programs that were developed. I've interacted with Marc for quite a while, and actually we had meetings as we were going through some new initiatives and events that are coming on. Marc, anything you want to share with us today as we get started?
No, thank you very much, Jim. I'm very pleased to be with you here today. A little bit about my background. As Jim mentioned, I spent 27 years with the Secret Service working on a variety of different tricky security issues like the threat of active shooters, and currently the Executive Vice President of a security consulting firm that works with schools, manufacturing sites, churches throughout the country to help them be better prepared to respond to this potential tech threat.
By the way, I felt much safer with you in the room over the weekend, and it's amazing when the background and the presence that you have from that standpoint. We've teamed with SEC and done multiple physical security site assessments, and they have a special program if you're building a new facility to help you engineer into the construction security, and that obviously saves money. And we're going to talk a lot today about a little bit different version of the topic. What do you do at the point of the event? Obviously, preparing is important, but now when you're faced with the I'm Jim Satterfield. I'm the Firestorm, and glad to be with you again today talking about this subject. And as we do this and we think about workplace violence, we're going to focus on prevention and response. Many times you see people focus just on what do you do during the moment or what happens afterwards with the crisis or the prevention area. And as you know, Firestorm focuses on identifying behaviors of concern before they escalate. But there are specific things that need to be addressed before, during the active shooter event, and after. The screen, and we're going to talk about that just for a couple of minutes this morning. It's a quote from an individual who was at a site and had identified a person that they thought was on a path to violence, and his comments were ignored. And in the aftermath, his quote was, "I wish they would have just listened to my concern." And so one of the things I think it's important in all of these areas is to make sure you have the voice of your people and understand what's occurring. So as we think about where you start and we think about physical security, it's access, awareness, and actions. How does somebody get in? Are there fences? Are there doors? Are there key cards? And if your security is breached, how do you know that they are there? Is that light so you can see alarm systems and actions? What do you want your people to do at that point in time? And we're going to really go into actions more today as we talk through those areas. It's important that you identify behaviors of concern before they escalate, and I think that there's opportunities for us to continue that discussion. The site assessment, identifying what the lines of sight, security, control, access points, the emergency plan, what is it, how do they know, have you trained your people, and hopefully, Mark, as we get to that, it'd be interesting for you to talk just anything that I've seen you've done with the cameras of individuals to it. And so it's the active shooter seconds or minutes that are going to make the difference in the crisis management afterwards. And having the insurance. I remember the shootings that happened in Orlando just a couple of weeks. This is a small business, 30 employees, and not the type that you would think of would have a violent event. Next learns about an individual there in it, or see the headlines right off the television screens, and the outcome with 4 people killed. This was the employee who had said earlier about the person, and he was concerned about that, and he'd even been attacked. If you see a satellite or picture, or you see a helicopter giving a picture in your location, that's certainly not going to be what we're looking for, a college or a university. But those are the types of images that it's not going to be business as usual at this location. But he was fired from the company for other reasons in the attack. He couldn't believe that the event. He spoke to the media, and by the way, that's something. In these types of areas, employees are going to come back and make statements to the media. Well, I warned him about that. They knew all along. They didn't take the proper actions. And so planning for those types of comments need to be important. Concern, terrible position to be in, particularly when you look up these types of things happening right where you are. Business that day for the rest of their lives. And it's important when we talk about these that they're really people here, faces of these individuals. It's a little, and 4 employees, 10% of your workforce, if you think of it in that area. But 1 person shot, a story and an impact in and of itself. Having to put this message is not what, and it's clearly changed everyone's life on an ongoing basis. So when we think there's some, Mark, what do you think about barriers to prepare?
I think it's schools, sites, workplaces, even in our own personal lives, that people put barriers up to security. Think about fire safety with SEC to do either site assessments or to do training sessions. There are a number of things in those facilities that have to do with either fire suppression, fire, all those facilities. Really, let's think back to when we were kids. We're doing biathlon on a basis. But it may be surprising to know that a child in that academic environment, a traditional school, hasn't been able to fire in over 65 years. But we still do all those things to prepare to be able to respond or protect ourselves from the threat of fire. We don't for as nearly as or as a threat, and there are a number of barriers, additional barriers that we place to prevent us from take similar type of.
Mark could say, Jim, it's been 65 years since a child was shot as a result of an act of violence. That would be a great webinar to be on with you. Now they'll be rolling me in the room at 65 years, but you know, at this point, it's difficult to imagine that we could go 65 days or even much less to be able to make that statement. So what a great vision and what a great understanding.
And that's really what we're trying to do through activities like this with associations in order to get people to start thinking in a similar, to take a similar type of approach to protect ourselves from the different types of threats we may face in schools, in our houses of worship, in our workplaces.
So more about barriers?
Yeah, what prevents us from really doing it? First of all, I think it's cost. We all are dealing with budgetary limitations. Regardless of what your budgets are, there are limitations, and there are a lot of competing values. So cost is usually one of the big things that prevent us from taking the necessary or comprehensive approach to security, whether it's having training sessions, whether it's putting in the right technology or the right physical security measures, doing comprehensive planning. So the costs associated with those things can be a barrier. Inconvenience, and I think the image of kind of talking or demonstrating the inconvenience that we all experience with security. On 9/10, back in 2001, none of us would have thought or be willing to experience the type of security screening we do now when we get on commercial airlines. But because the threat is different now, or because of 9/11, it's just part of our daily life. So we're willing to experience a little bit more, put up with a little bit more inconvenience. But security by its very nature is going to create some inconvenience. And so that's, I think, the second reason. Aesthetics is another reason. We don't like the way it looks. Again, we work in a lot of facilities, for example, in schools, where the important, how does it look? We don't want bars. We don't want barbed wire. We don't want all the different things, you know, like if you envision kind of a Supermax prison or Guantanamo Bay. We don't like the appearance of that. And so the aesthetics, how it looks, how it makes us feel, how it changes the environment that we're working in is a barrier. And finally, belief. If you don't believe it's going to happen, will not do the things necessary to prepare yourself to respond effectively and efficiently. If I don't think it's going to happen to me, then we will not do the things necessary to prepare. It's always going to be somebody else's problem. It's going to be in somebody else's business or somebody else's school or somebody else's community until it is not. And if you have a little bit of belief that it could happen, you will do the responsible and appropriate things to better prepare yourself in case it actually placed to business.
And as we've talked about, there are 2 million episodes of workplace violence annually in the United States from OSHA's perspective. 2 million times. Now, those may not be an active shooter, but it's an event happening in the workplace. And there are over 2 million episodes of bullying annually in our schools. So that's 4 million events. What's the probability that one of those events could occur at your location? I will guarantee you that group of people in Florida with 30 employees didn't realize that they would be that one. I like your belief comment. I think that's an entitled one. So when do we want preparation?
When do we want security? We want it when we feel threatened. When we feel threatened. I have traveled all over the world based on the nature of my business, and I've gone to a lot of areas of conflict. And in the places we stayed in, Pakistan, for example, you could not even stay in any of the Western hotels because the threat level was so high. And so actually we would have to stay on the embassy grounds. And the embassy grounds were incredibly well protected. And they had a lot of security measures, military-like security measures around this facility. And I was happy with that because I felt secure in this environment because of the security measures that were there, because I felt that the threat was real. Recently, I traveled with my family to Walt Disney World, had a great family vacation. I wouldn't want any of those security measures that were around the U.S. Embassy grounds in Pakistan to be around the hotel where I was vacationing with my children. The difference was I didn't feel threatened there. Well, when we feel threatened, when we think, again, we have the belief that this possibility exists, then we're going to do the appropriate things necessary to prepare ourselves. That's when the competing values between freedom and access for security starts to lean more towards the security side, when we actually feel that the threat is real.
So there's a balance, is what you're saying.
There absolutely needs to be a balance. There needs to be a balance. I always go talk about the example of your ATM pin. Most of our ATM pins are 4-digit pins. If the law changed and the ATM pin became a 15-digit pin and you had to change it every month, I don't think the consumer population would be very excited about that, because the balance becomes way off. We can accept the security, but it has to be at the appropriate levels. It has to blend into the environment, and it cannot dramatically change the experiences that we're having either in our workplaces or in our schools or in our houses of worship. If it becomes too cumbersome, too oppressive, then at the end of the day, people will either reject it, they won't utilize the security measures, they'll do everything they can to bypass it because, again, the balance is off, and they'll want to go back more towards the freedom and the access than they will having the appropriate security measures in place. So they have to be at the right levels.
In your experience, and you're both in businesses and locations, do you feel violence is increasing? I mean, is this an increasing threat today?
We believe it certainly is, and I think statistics back it up that the numbers are on active shooters or workplace violences are increasing. It's still relative, but they are on the uptick. Our belief, though, is if it can happen, though, why not do the things you can to prepare, to make sure, as you always stress on the front end, preparation is everything. We want to be stopping these events before they actually can occur and have the awful impact like it did in that business down in Orlando.
So obviously this starts to come together. There's a process that these occur. Can you step us through that a little bit and talk about the elements that you've shown here on the screen?
We think there are three real pillars or three legs of a stool for any good security plan. First, or program. First, a site assessment, understanding your site, the strengths, the weaknesses, any vulnerabilities that may exist, understanding the policy and procedure, as you mentioned previously, how do people get into the facility? What are our locking mechanisms? What are the design features that either create a vulnerability or address a vulnerability? Understanding your site. We don't believe in taking a cookie cutter approach because every place is different. Every environment is a little bit different. What's around the sites may have an impact on the security or the threat level for whatever specific venue we're talking about. So an in-depth site assessment, knowing the strengths and weaknesses. We've been to so many facilities where they have a lockdown procedure, but none of the doors on any of the rooms or offices or classrooms have locks on them. We've had people practice barricading their doors, but the doors all opened out into the hallway. So you're barricading something. You can't barricade a door that opens out. So unless you understand your site, the strengths, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities of them, then that's to have that baseline understanding of the site itself. Next, you can then build. Go ahead. I'm sorry, Jim.
Let me be quick if I could. No, it's okay. You're giving lots of great information, and I just wanted to relate some experience and you've seen in your career with the Secret Service and all the things you've done and as leadership chairs there. It's my understanding that the Secret Service perception is if they have to draw their gun, that their plan failed. Is that a reasonable statement? Is that consistent with your thought?
That's an extremely true statement. If that means that our site security plan, there was a failure because someone's getting in that closer proximity to the individual that we're protecting, that we now have to respond, with firearms ourselves or lethal force, then there was a failure in the security plan. That somehow that vulnerability. That's why we, every venue that we go to with any of our protectees, the president, the vice president, we spend weeks, days and weeks sometimes, looking at that site, understanding, again, the strengths, the weaknesses, the vulnerabilities, and putting in a plan in place in order to minimize or mitigate or completely neutralize those vulnerabilities to ensure that everybody who's coming in close proximity or anything that's coming into close proximity, whether it's vehicles, whether it's packages, whether it's people, is appropriately screened. So when they get in that proximity to our protectee, there's no need for the guns to come out because they will not present a threat to the people we were assigned to protect.
Obviously, we scaled that down in our workplaces as we look at, but similarly, when Mark and Jason look at a location, they're looking at it through different eyes and they're seeing different things. When you go to work every day, you're probably looking, wait a minute, did I get the parking spot closest to the door and not where the other people would have access and coming through. So I think sometimes we move quickly past the site assessment area, and the idea of having trained eyes to know what's going on, to understand what the implications of it. And your example of the door that opens outward is absolutely 100% on target. So I think that's an interesting emphasis to keep in place. But once you've done that and you either in construction or afterwards made an attempt to do that, you have to have a plan. So tell us a little bit about the plan.
Yeah, plans we think are critically important. What are the roles and responsibilities? What do we want people to do? And what are the different roles and responsibilities in those protocols for a variety of different types of potential emergencies? Who's going to be making the notifications? Who's going to doing accountability? Who's going to be dealing with, for example, if there is a media presence? Who's going to be working on for education? If we have, again, going back to our school clients, how are we turning our children, our students back over to parents or emergency contacts or guardians? Understanding those things on the front end and having a very comprehensive, fleshed out plan associated with a variety of different potential emergencies, not just for fire, not just for tornado or for severe weather, but for things such as a violent intruder or bomb threats, for example. What are our response protocols? Gas leaks. So they're listing all the different emergencies that you could experience, and then having very clear delineated roles and responsibilities for all the personnel in those workspaces. What are they supposed to do in relationship to that threat?
Great. And so obviously, if we do that, we're going to have to have not only a plan, people need to be trained.
That's exactly right. We believe at SEC that people don't rise to the occasion, they sink to the level of their training. And so plans are really great before an event, and they may be helpful after an event, but during a real true emergency, getting that binder off the shelf or going into the laptop to figure out what the protocols are will really slow down your ability to respond efficiently and effectively. What's going to help us respond efficiently and effectively is training. So back and understand, we've gone through these scenarios. We've given ourselves a script. If you do not give yourself a script, if there's something to go back on and say, oh, I have been taught to do this. When I hear this alert, this is what my response is going to be. If you haven't practiced that, then you're going to just respond instinctively. Your fight, your flight, your freeze instinct may kick in, and that may not be the appropriate response for the specific threat. So we have a violent intruder in there. What are my options associated with it? What have I been trained to do? And a violent intruder comes into your facility. If you haven't been given a script and you are one of those people that just has one of those prehistorically hardwired freeze instincts kick in, that's probably not the appropriate response for that specific threat. So the 3 legs of the stool: understanding our environments, understanding our policies and procedures, and then having training to support both of those things. We think those are the 3 legs of the stool of any good comprehensive security program.
So when you're under pressure, and obviously if you're in a critical incident, that's pressure, it's got to be pre-wired. It's not a time to sit down and think, okay, well, he's coming up the stairs, there's a gun, I could do this, or the other. It's understanding that and having everybody on the same page at the same time. Can you give just a bit of a description of the training you do and how that's done?
One of the scenarios we do in relationship to an active shooter is actually one of our consultants will play the role of a violent intruder. We actually film them using GoPros, and we'll enter into the facility brandishing a replica firearm and try to create a little bit of realism associated, just to see, hey, what are your response protocols? We do the first one in the very beginning of our training. We call it the untrained scenario. Not that creative of a term, but it's the untrained scenario. We're just trying to get a baseline of where what that school's program is, what that house of worship, what that manufacturing sites, where are they right now? And then we provide them, and we film their response. We watch what they do. Do they freeze? Do they go to portions of the facility where they can't actually physically secure themselves because they're not behind either a locked or barricaded door? What did they actually do? And then we review it. We'll actually watch, and you see some fantastic responses, and sometimes you see some things that's scarier or a little bit tragic because these people haven't been given any type of script. They've never experienced anything like that, and as a result, their responses are not what they should be or need to be to keep them or the people they may be responsible safe. So that's why giving yourself that script, that training. I've experienced this before. I understand what's happening, and I understand what my choices are, and I'm going to efficiently and effectively execute one of those choices.
Seems like a great way to get people engaged, because then they're learning on their specific actions and seeing the impacts, both the before and the after, as you think about those things. So if you're listening and you're looking to how do you get your people to start to make this part of your culture, one of the things that we talk about a great deal is self-discovery. If you tell somebody they have a problem, or you tell somebody that this is what they need to decide or do, it's different when they experience it, when they reach that self-discovery area. And this type of training works all the way down to a daycare center, through an elementary, through a high school, through a college, through a business environment, and it can have a significant impact on getting everybody on the same page. But when we think about active shooter, let's talk a little bit about what the steps are that would go into that training, or looking at specifically the actions that you want them to take.
Yeah, we think that there are only 3 things you can do in relationship to the threat of an active shooter, and that's to evacuate, to secure yourself, or unfortunately if there is no other option, you may have to confront the violent intruder or the active shooter. And let's go through them a little bit. So for example, many of you I'm sure have heard run, hide, and fight. We think that the terminology we use is a little bit more specific. We're trying to give you really specific. We just don't want you to run away or run somewhere. We want you to evacuate. We want you to get as far away from the threat as you possibly can. Of all the choices, of the three choices, this one is kind of my favorite. If you can get away from the problem, do it. And think about all the different ways you actually can get out. And so you may have to be creative a little bit. Are there windows in a space that can be broken that can help with an evacuation? Recently, we're watching the footage from the shooting in down in Florida at Fort Lauderdale, down at the baggage claim. People just kind of went to the ground. That was just their fight or their freeze instinct kicking in, where they had abilities to get away from the problem. So evacuate if you possibly can. For us, that's getting behind either a locked or extremely well barricaded door that prevents access to you from the active shooter or the violent intruder. In examinations of many of these active shooter cases, they found that they do not spend a lot of time trying to degrade either locked or barricaded doors, because they're on the clock themselves. They know that somebody has dialed 911, first responders, those police departments, they're coming. So the time that they have, it's a little bit like a bank robbery, is limited. So if you can get behind a locked or very well barricaded door and secure yourself, fantastic. And then finally, the worst case scenario, if there's no choice, if you didn't have the opportunity to either secure or to evacuate, because you're the first person or one of the first people to engage with this intruder or active shooter, then you must be able to, you have to confront. You have to think about defending the people you're with, going to the vulnerable areas on the body, the eyes, the nose, the groin. If you're injured or wounded, keep fighting. You think about what you can have in your facility, in your workspaces that you can use as a weapon to help defend yourself, whether it's laptops, whether it's extinguishers, whether it's tools, anything you can use, whether it's belts, anything that's on your body, in your briefcase, in your purse, in your desk, around your workspace that you can use to defend yourself. So evacuate, secure, or confront. Remind people is that these are not linear choices. These are concepts. Which one you choose is going to be based on where you are, who you are with, and where you are in relationship to the event. If the event is started in one side of the building that you're in, you don't have to confront. You may have a fantastic opportunity to evacuate. So these are not linear choices. They're going to be based on the situation itself.
Jim, are you there?
I am
Jim?
there. I was talking to the mute button, and I was enjoying myself. Probably everybody was enjoying not hearing me talk at that point. So as we look at it, you've identified these options, I think, clearly, but trying to think about them when you're under that pressure of the moment makes a big difference. The evacuate is, let's try to reduce the available targets that someone would have, and if we can get away. They're in one part of the building, you're in another. I think that's a very clear, specific instruction, and that's kind of years ago in these types of events. So that's a clearer subject, and it's also clearer than run. Run where? Run how? Run, what is that? Evacuate is an orderly process. We are still evacuating in a fire drill. We understand that, understanding where the exits are and using them. So you could even take one of your drills and make it an evacuation exercise around this theme. Now, when we think of all of these areas, the concept here that's important is we want to extend, we want to time, because when seconds really matter, police will be there in minutes. There's no way that they can be there, oh, this person's here and they're here in less than a minute. The Northern Illinois shootings, they actually were there in 34 seconds, but that's the rare exception in these types of areas. So what we're trying to do is to extend the runway seconds and minutes so that law enforcement can come to your aid and provide assistance. Now, recognize once we're at that point, our security, the access has been overcome. They're inside. The threat is here. It's right now where we are. And so we have to become aware of it to know if we can evacuate or if we need to secure to those areas. So your objective here is to extend that runway, to buy time. As you've heard already, the examples that Marc has given of what you can do and how you can make that work. So the run hide, doesn't it sound more positive to tell your people to secure instead of hide? You only hide if you're afraid or you're hiding it. It seems it's not a hide and seek game that we're playing here. It's a very important time in our lives and in those minutes that are coming by. And then fight. It's not a fight. We're not going to, somebody has a gun and you're not, it's not a shootout at the OK Corral scenario that we're looking at here. It's throw. If you throw something at someone, they're going to duck. If there's a group of you, you're going to overwhelm. There are a series of steps that you can take, but to think about that, that's our step of last option associated with it. So I think you've organized your thoughts extremely well, Marc, as we look here. Before we move on, anything else you want to say about this active shooter response?
Well, I just want to point out, and it's on the screen, that the red button alerting, and we really emphasize that. The most important thing, or the initial thing, in order to extend that runway, is we have to let each other know that this event is occurring. Why is going back to fire safety? Why is a fire alarm so effective? With the strobes, supported with the strobes. Everybody hears it. Everybody at the same time. Everybody knows what it means, and we've been trained to do something in relationship to that. So having facilities that allows everybody to know that's unique, that this is going on, that this is occurring, to warn them that we actually have a violent intruder or an active shooter in that space, so they can then have the time to execute one of the protocols, such as evacuation or securing or getting something to defend themselves. So alerting is critically important.
So are you ready? How do you know? And are you sure? And are you sure? Where do you start in looking at each of these things? The physical security site assessment clearly is an important element. Training your people, major element. But if we can identify that threat before it escalates to violence, that is going to mean that we're not having to deal with that situation in that second. We've talked a lot about the BERTHA program, Behavioral Risk Threat Assessment. It's a program that you can put into your organization that you can see these patterns that we talked about. We gave the quote from the gentleman earlier, if they would have just listened, it wouldn't have happened. So today we've talked about if they just would have listened and then gave you steps to be prepared, and then finally help you to understand here are the things that we can do if we find ourselves in that situation: the evacuate, the secure, the confront. So not all threats and behaviors are equal, but understanding and seeing that. The Secret Service is clearly has that ability, and as you've seen these events where they're standing and watching, looking for a sign that something doesn't fit, that someone may be making a gesture or a move that places them in a position of having to react. But finding that behavior before it escalates is something that every business can do, every school can do. And will we eliminate 100% of those? No. But how many children do we have to save for it to be worthwhile? How many employees do we have to save in your location to make a difference. So these behaviors, we're talking about active shooter today, but they could have been bullying, it could have been sexual harassment, other factors in the workplace. Those elements are there. So we've covered a lot of concepts today, and we hope that you found it helpful to hear from somebody that's been both in that first responder role, both in that planning, and planning at a level beyond where most of us will ever be and find today and see those insights. If you would like some more information, there will be a brief available following the webinar. It'll be up on our website. We anticipate next week. In fact, we will send you a follow-up email with a link so you can download the brief from today's webinar. We'll also have the recording of today if you want to share it with someone else in your organization and have that ability to go back through it again. It's part of the ongoing continuing education program. So the easy access is firestorm.com/briefs, and you'll find it listed there. And it should be up sometime next week, but we'll send you an email with a link. As we think about this, Blair, I know that we don't have Joe today. Anything that you want to add on behalf of, from your perspective, the New Jersey MEP?
Just to want to thank Mark. Mark, thank you very much for your time and insight on this, and let everyone know that if there's any questions, contact Joe or myself, and that if anybody, one of the things we have been offering to the MEP clients and anyone who's on this webinar, we do have a continuity assessment that we do. We'll be more than happy to do that at no charge because of the relationship. And if anyone's interested in maybe having a site survey or a security survey, you know, SEC is that's in their wheelhouse, and I'm more than happy to chat with anybody about that.
And Blair, I'm assuming you would also do the workplace violence assessment also for them if they needed that.
Oh, of course, yeah.
Okay. I know a bunch of questions have come in, and we're close. So if it's possible, Blair, if you could reach out to everyone to answer those questions, I think that'll be a big help.
I'll get all the questions and follow up.
That'll be great. Thanks, Blair. Mark, any last advice you want to share with everyone?
No, thanks very much. I appreciate it, Blair and Jim and everybody on the webinar today. And just, again, the really small point, just having that little bit of belief is the most important first step. And if you have that little bit of belief, then you will do the things associated with a good security program to keep you and all the people at your workplace as safe as they possibly can be.
And by the way, Mark, thanks for your service, the dedication that you have exhibited in your career with the Secret Service, and what you're now doing in helping schools and businesses become prepared, in particular for this very critical incident in this direction. Anyone watching can go to firestorm.com, our website. There are resources and materials there. You can send us an email at webinars@firestorm.com. and we'll be glad to be back in touch with you, or you can call us at 800-321-2219. One last program to mention, Firestorm has a program called Crisis Stop. It's available to you at no cost. If you find yourself in a crisis, give us a call. We'll help you in that very critical first hour at no cost to you. The decisions that you make, the actions that you take, and the words that you say will determine, does this crisis escalate or stabilize? Our hope is that as we've talked about all these things today, that you won't experience an active shooter or a critical incident within your organization. I love the statement that Mark shared with us at the very beginning. We do fire drills monthly, quarterly, regularly, all the way through, but it's been 65 years since a child died in a school fire. Let's make sure that we can extend that streak in the area of violence and active shooter. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for your time today. We appreciate your input. Have a great day, and until our webinar next month, this is Firestorm, America's Crisis Coach. Have a great day. Goodbye.
Thanks, Jim. Bye now.